You look like yesterday's trash. Take your boots and walk out before I make you leave." The billionaire's voice was cold steel, his words slicing through the hushed dining room like a whip. Yet in the shadow of that arrogance, there was an invisible thread, a sense that he had just cursed his own fate, spoken into existence the ghost of his downfall. The restaurant shimmered with excess. Crystal chandeliers cast golden halos over the velvet-draped booths. Champagne flutes caught the candlelight in 1,000 sparkling fragments. Every polished surface reflected luxury, wealth, power. The scent of truffle oil and seared Wagyu beef clung to the air like a heavy perfume. It was a temple for the elite. The Aurelius Club, a place where billionaires and senators nursed their egos along with their wine. At the center of it all sat Charles Whitmore III, the empire builder, the man whose real estate towers carved into the skyline like monuments to himself. His silk tie was perfectly knotted, his Rolex glinting with quiet menace as he raised his hand to dismiss the intruder. The intruder was a black man, older, his hair peppered with gray, shoulders broad, but slightly stooped. He wore a jacket too worn for this place, boots scuffed by years of walking roads most of these patrons had never imagined existed. A man out of place, yes, but not dishonorable. His eyes were steady, proud, even as Whitmore's words tore into him. The veteran began, his voice gravelly, hesitant, but strong. "You what?" Whitmore sneered, leaning back in his chair as if even the air shared with this man was an affront. "Think you can waltz in here, dressed like that, smelling like cheap whiskey and diesel fuel, and sit beside men who run the world? This is not your bar, soldier. This is mine." The word soldier fell from Whitmore's lips like poison, meant not as respect, but mockery. The room shifted. Forks hovered in midair. Whispers rippled like the rustling of leaves. Some patrons stared at their plates, unwilling to be seen choosing a side. Others glanced openly, hungry for the spectacle, complicit in silence. The veteran's jaw tightened. He had known stares like these before, long before wealth draped its silken curtains across his oppressors' faces. He had felt them on dusty streets overseas, in the heat of battle where blood was the only currency that mattered. Yet here, in the gilded cage of the Aurelius Club, the battlefield was different, his uniform invisible, his sacrifice unseen. "I serve this country," he said finally, his voice steady but quiet, a man clinging to dignity even as it was stripped from him. Whitmore laughed, the sound sharp and cruel. "And what did that buy you? A seat in my restaurant? No, my friend. Service may win you medals, but it won't win you entry into this world. Not tonight. Not ever." A ripple of unease passed through the diners. But no one moved. No one spoke. It was easier to watch the lion devour than to question why he chose his prey. The veteran stood taller, though his hands trembled slightly at his sides. His gaze flickered to the chandelier above, to the walls gilded with portraits of old money, to the faces staring at him like he was a trespasser in a museum of the untouchable. "You don't understand," he murmured more to himself than to Whitmore. "Oh, I understand perfectly." Whitmore leaned forward, eyes glittering with the satisfaction of dominance. "You are nothing more than a story no one wants to hear, a past no one remembers. And tonight, you are an embarrassment at my table." A hush fell deeper over the room. The clinking glasses stopped. The air itself seemed to hold its breath. The veteran's chest rose and fell slowly. His pride was battered but not broken. His silence carried a weight that unsettled some of the diners more than Whitmore's cruelty ever could. And yet, he did not leave. Whitmore's brows knitted at the audacity. "Still here?" His lips curled into a thin, venomous smile. "Then perhaps I should make it clearer." He reached across the table, picked up the medal that hung from the man's neck, a bronze star, dulled by time, but not by meaning, and let it dangle from his fingers like a trinket stolen from a beggar. "This?" he scoffed, holding it high so that the chandelier's light struck its surface. "This little piece of metal you clutch like a child's toy? In here, it's worth less than the napkin I wipe my mouth with." Gasps broke from the crowd. The veteran's face hardened, but his eyes glistened. For a man who had watched brothers die for that medal's worth, the insult was a wound deeper than any bullet. Still, he stood silent. Whitmore, emboldened, tossed the medal onto the table with a careless flick, the sound of it clattering across the white linen echoing like a gunshot in the stunned room. "There," he said, voice dripping with condescension. "Pick it up and get out." The veteran did not move. He stared at the medal, at the reflection of light bending off its edges, at the history it carried that no man in this room could ever measure. And in that silence, the air shifted again. A door opened at the far end of the restaurant. Heels clicked against the marble floor, the rhythm sharp and commanding. Heads turned. A young woman entered, her hair the same golden hue as Whitmore's, her stride full of the confidence inherited from wealth but not yet poisoned by it. Whitmore's daughter. She walked past the tables, her gaze fixed, not at her father, not at the patrons, but at the medal lying tarnished on the linen. Her hand reached for it before the veterans could. She lifted it gently, her fingers brushing its surface as though it were holy. She looked at the old man, and for a moment, recognition flickered in her eyes, not of his face, but of the sacrifice carved into the metal she held. Whitmore's smile faltered. "Father," she said softly, her voice trembling yet resolute. "Do you even know what this is?" The room stilled once more. The billionaire's face drained of its smugness, but his pride chained him to silence. The veteran stood motionless. The daughter's eyes locked on her father's. Her voice rose, sharper now, echoing through the hall of wealth. "This isn't a toy. It's a bronze star. It's the blood of men who fought while you bought your way into comfort, and you just threw it on the table like trash." The metal glistened in her hand, and in that instant, every diner knew Charles Whitmore III had unleashed something he could never control. The dining room hung between glitter as Charles Whitmore III tapped a crystal glass. "Harper," he said, silky and sharp, "put the medal down and stop turning a private club into a circus." "It's not a prop," Harper answered, stepping in front of the veteran. "It's the reason this room is allowed to exist." A ripple moved through the booths. Someone pressed record. The Aurelius hush curdled into the quiet of people waiting for a mess they could discuss later. The maitre d' approached with palms up. "Mr. Whitmore, perhaps we seat the gentleman in the lounge?" Whitmore's gaze never left the veteran. "We don't buy off bad optics. We enforce standards." "I was invited," the veteran said, voice calm. "By whom?" Whitmore's eyebrow climbed. "A memory?" A woman at the bar raised a hand. "Me," she said. "Delgado. He saved my unit outside Sanguin." Whitmore barely glanced at her. "Your sentiment is noted. It does not change policy." Harper's chin lifted. "Your policies are your moods in fancy font." A few diners laughed and hid the sound. The old banker at table 4 muttered, "Careful," to no one. Whitmore orchestrated the air. "This is a sanctuary. Jackets, discretion, and the ability not to embarrass oneself are mandatory." He fails all three. The veteran stood very still. Sweat haloed his collar. His hands hung open, mapped by work. He looked at the medal in Harper's palm, and then at Whitmore. "I came for a meal with a friend," he said, "not to be an exhibit." From the corner, a young man whispered, "This will hit feeds in 10. His date typed, "Billionaire ejects black vet." Delgado stepped forward. "Seat him. Charge it to me." Whitmore's smile showed the comfort of consequence-free cruelty. "I could seat him at a table in the kitchen." "You mean hide him?" Harper said. I mean protect the brand. The brand. Harper's laugh cut like glass. It will survive a plate of oysters and a conscience. Servers hovered. Butter and thyme drifted from the kitchen. Two suited security men materialized near the door. Courteous and inevitable. "Gentlemen," Whitmore said, "with courtesy." Harper planted her feet. "Touch him and you touch me." "Don't," the veteran murmured. "I've left nicer rooms." "You shouldn't have to," she said. A journalist slid his phone into voice memo mode. His date watched Whitmore as if seeing the skeleton under the suit. Whitmore spread his arms. "Chaos follows when lines blur. Next we'll be wearing denim to funerals." "Lines?" the veteran said. "I've seen lines. Supply lines. Firing lines. The line you cross when you leave a friend behind. This isn't a line. It's a rope, and you're tugging it." The banker cleared his throat. A socialite whispered, "He's poetic." Surprised that poetry could come without money, the maitre d', desperate, tried last rites. "If we offer the gentleman our private elevator—" "No one will know," Harper cut in. "Everyone already knows." Phones dotted the room like fireflies. A line cook peeked out. The bartender slid a tumbler of water onto a nearby table, as if hospitality could wait there. Whitmore lowered his voice, the register that ended with signatures. "Harper, step aside. You'll thank me once the noise passes." "The noise is people," she said, and one of them bled for the right to sit. He stepped closer, smile thinning to wire. "You mistake defiance for principle, and you mistake power for virtue." Delgado's composure cracked. "If you throw him out, throw me out too." "Gladly," Whitmore said and raised a hand. Security advanced. Sterile cologne, laundered threat. The nearer man extended an open palm. "Sir." The veteran stared at the hand. He knew when a grip offered safety and when it offered exit. "I can walk," he said. "Please don't," Harper whispered. "The gentleman is cooperating," Whitmore announced. Nothing to see, but there was everything to see. The gold frames looked suddenly gaudy, as if money had overpronounced itself. The veteran took a breath and turned. The door was 10 steps away. He made the first one, his boot loud on marble. "Wait," Harper said. The word accord that stopped the room. She lifted the metal. "You said standards. Fine. Here's one. Respect." Whitmore paused, calculation glinting. He granted her a beat. "Make your case." Briefly, Harper faced the room. "Mr. Lee didn't wander in. He was invited because he carried people none of you will ever meet. He came to keep a promise. If we send him out that door, the promise goes with him. What are we then? A menu with no soul." Silence, pressed down and lifted. The journalist's pen slowed. Even one guard shifted, betraying neutrality. Whitmore clapped once, elegant and final. "Speech over. Escort him out. I'll handle the donations this will require." The veteran touched Harper's elbow, gentle. "Let it be," he said. "I don't need a table to prove I exist." "You need a seat," she insisted. "And he needs to learn what a standard really is." "And what is that?" Whitmore asked, amused. "If not money, if not taste?" she said, and the word settled like a stone. The guard gestured. The veteran moved a second step, then a third. At the fourth, Delgado spoke through clenched teeth. "I won't forget this." "You never do," Whitmore said. At the fifth step, a camera clicked. At the sixth, a drop of red wine bloomed on white. At the seventh, Harper said quietly but clearly, "My seat is his." The room stopped again. Whitmore's smile fractured. "What did you say?" "You deny him. You deny me. I resign my membership. I leave with him." People shifted, interested not in morality, but in fallout. The maitre d' made a small sound like a bird hitting glass. Whitmore stared as if she were a mispriced asset. "You won't." "I will." The veteran looked at her, startled. "Miss, please." "Harper," she said, "if you're walking out, I'm walking with you." The door loomed, but Harper's defiance rooted the veteran where he stood. The crowd's stares pressed on him like lead, heavy and unrelenting. For years he had carried silence, a shield against questions that never came, but now forced into spectacle. Memories clawed to the surface. "I don't want your pity," he said, voice steady, but low. His gaze drifted across the chandeliers, the polished marble, the velvet curtains. "I've been through worse rooms than this." The journalist leaned closer, pen whispering. Delgado's eyes softened. Harper tilted her head, urging him. "Then tell them. They won't understand. Unless you tell them." He exhaled, slow and heavy. "Afghanistan, Helmand Province. We were running convoy supply routes laced with IEDs. The kind of work that doesn't make speeches but keeps soldiers alive long enough to make it home." No fork clinked. Even Whitmore, momentarily robbed of script, froze in a glare that faltered. Harper's fingers tightened around the bronze star. It gleamed softly in the chandelier light, and he tossed it like a coaster. The veteran shrugged, but his jaw clenched. "It's not for him. It's for them." His voice dropped further. "And I came here tonight because one of them asked me before he died to sit with his sister on her birthday. This restaurant was her choice. He made me promise." A murmur surged across the room, breaking through the golden hush. Whitmore's smile flickered his mask, thinning. The veteran's shoulders slumped slightly. "I promised him. So I came. That's all." Harper blinked hard, her eyes brightening with something deeper than anger. She whispered, "That's everything." Phones tilted higher now. The story had grown teeth. The billionaire versus the veteran had become something heavier. A man's promise weighed against a man's pride. Delgado pressed her palm against her lips. "My God," she breathed. "You kept walking while carrying that." The veteran gave a small, bitter smile. "You don't stop walking. You just change where the road takes you, and sometimes it takes you to a place like this where people would rather polish their glassware than look at you." The maitre d' fidgeted with his cufflinks. One of the guards stepped back suddenly, unwilling to touch a man who had dragged friends from fire. Even those who had looked away now stared openly, their silence less comfortable. Whitmore cleared his throat, searching for the power he felt, slipping. A touching monologue, he said, sharp and dismissive, though his tone had thinned. "But this is a restaurant, not a battlefield. We dine on cuisine, not on war stories." The veteran met his gaze unblinking. "You dine? Because of those war stories?" The words sank like stones. Harper lifted the metal high, and for a moment it caught the room's breath. She looked at her father. "You can't erase what he is. You can only reveal what you are." Whitmore's lips pressed thin. His empire had always lived on appearances, on controlling the narrative. But in this room, with every phone angled like 100 unblinking witnesses, the narrative was no longer his alone. The veteran exhaled, turning slightly toward the door again. He looked older than his years, the weight of memory bending him, yet his eyes burned with quiet strength, the kind of strength invisible to those who measured power in dollars. Harper touched his arm. "Don't go. Not yet." He gave her a small, sad smile. "I've lived most of my life leaving places before. Am welcome. That doesn't change now." "It should," she whispered. The silence swelled once more, thick with history and judgment. In that moment, everyone could summon him not as an intruder, not as a man in worn boots, but as the living echo of battles fought far away, so that these chandeliers could glitter freely. And in that revelation, sympathy hardened into respect. The silence did not last. It cracked under Charles Whitmore's laugh, low, venomous, too loud for the room. "Respect?" he said, teeth flashing beneath the chandelier glow. "You confuse pity for respect, Harper. You think a sob story about mud and bombs earns him a velvet seat at my table? No. Respect is built with power, with vision, with the kind of steel that raises towers into the sky, not the kind that rusts in forgotten deserts. His voice carried, deliberate, striking the diners like hammer blows. The crowd stirred, caught between outrage and fear. The veteran stood still, but his jaw hardened. Harper's hand remained on his arm, defiant. "You don't hear yourself, do you?" she said softly. "I hear myself perfectly," Whitmore snapped. He turned toward the room, raising his glass as though making a toast. "This country celebrates service because it makes people feel virtuous without effort. You send men like him to fight. Then you clap when they limp, back, home, broken, and give them a medal. Meanwhile, men like me build the future. We give you cities, jobs, entire skylines. That is worth more than a rusted trinket and a faded story." Gasps rippled. The banker from earlier shifted in his seat, uneasy. A young influencer at the back muttered into her phone, "He's doubling down. God, this is ugly." Delgado slammed her palm on the bar. "Ugly? It's obscene." "Careful," Whitmore said, eyes narrowing on her. "I could buy and sell you before your glass hits the counter." "You can't buy back your soul," she retorted. Laughter broke from a corner, harsh and awkward, the nervous sound of people caught in a spectacle too big to ignore. Phones hovered higher. The spectacle was no longer private. It was metastasizing in real time. The veteran's lips parted, but no words came. He looked to the floor, to the marble veins beneath his boots, as though tracing a path to escape. His shoulders bore the invisible weight of every insult, every slight endured in silence. Whitmore saw the slump, and it emboldened him. He stepped forward, close enough that the champagne on his breath brushed the veteran's face. "Do you know what men like you are? Reminders. Relics. You remind us of blood we don't want to think about, sacrifices we don't want to repay. That's why you don't belong. You break the illusion." Harper's eyes blazed. "The illusion is you." But the crowd, tense and buzzing, was turning. A few diners nodded faintly at Whitmore's words, finding comfort in the brutal logic of wealth. A man in a Navy suit whispered, "He's right. Clubs are for standards." Another muttered, "This isn't the place for war stories." Their murmurs tightened the rope around the veteran. He heard echoes of every rejection. The job he didn't get, the apartment that turned him away, the bus seat denied decades ago. He stood inside a hall of mirrors, each reflection another reminder of where society decided he did not belong. Harper gripped his arm harder. "Don't listen." The veteran finally raised his eyes, meeting Whitmore's gaze. His voice was raw but steady. "You think I want your seat? I've sat on dirt floors with men braver than you'll ever be. I've eaten rations that tasted like ash, with brothers who died the next day. Your velvet doesn't tempt me. But the promise I made, that's why I came." The words cut, but Whitmore smirked. "Promises are for the weak. Power is for the strong." The crowd shifted, restless. Tension thickened like smoke. The guards stepped forward again, their hands twitching near the veteran's shoulders, though hesitation lingered. Whitmore spread his arms wide, playing the master of ceremonies. "Ladies and gentlemen, what you see before you is the difference between two worlds. One built by wealth, the other begging at its door. Ask yourself, which world do you wish to dine in?" The room answered, with silence. But their eyes told the truth. Some pitied, some scorned, some secretly agreed. All watched. The veteran's throat tightened. His silence screamed louder than Whitmore's tirade, but it left him isolated. Then from the back, Delgado shouted, "He fought for your right to sit here and spit on him, Whitmore!" The room trembled with murmurs. One man hissed, "Sit down, Delgado!" Another whispered, "She's right." Whitmore's smile turned sharp. The mob always loves a martyr, but mobs fade, power remains. He leaned so close the veteran could smell the expensive wine on his breath. "You think you've endured humiliation. You haven't begun to feel it." The veteran's fists curled, but he held. His entire body shook with restraint, the discipline forged in war now used to contain the fire inside. "Dad, stop," Harper said, voice cracking. But Whitmore did not stop. His cruelty sharpened, honed by an audience. He raised his glass and poured the last of his champagne over the metal in Harper's hand. The golden liquid dripped down her wrist, staining the ribbon. The room gasped. Whitmore's grin was wide now, grotesque. "There. That's all it's worth. Wine spilled on silk. A souvenir. Nothing more." Harper's breath caught. Her knuckles whitened around the metal. "You—" Her voice trembled, fury shaking it into shards. "You've become the very thing you pretend to despise, weak, cowardly, hiding behind glass and gold." The veteran stood frozen, face pale. His silence was no longer calm, it was despair. The crowd leaned forward, the drama too sharp to look away from. Half horrified, half entertained, they were sharks circling blood. Whitmore raised his voice again, louder, resonant with arrogance. "This man has no place in my world, and if my own daughter insists otherwise, then she too will learn that sentiment has no seat at the table of power." The chandeliers shivered, as though even the crystal recoiled. The pressure closed in like a vice. The veteran, Harper, even Delgado, they were encircled by wealth, prejudice, and silent witnesses too afraid to stand. There was no exit without loss, and for the first time, the veteran's eyes dimmed. He looked at Harper and whispered, "Maybe he's right. Maybe I should go." The room held its breath, and Whitmore's smile widened, sensing victory, sensing the crack in his opponent's spirit. The air inside the Aurelius Club was electric, charged with tension so thick it felt combustible. Every pair of eyes was fixed on the veteran, waiting for his next step. Whitmore's grin stretched like a predator savoring the slow collapse of prey. "Yes," Whitmore said, savoring the word, dripping it like honey into the silence. "Go. Walk out, and leave with the scraps of dignity you think you still carry. Let everyone see how little your metal means when weighed against real power." The veteran's chest rose, heavy, his lips pressed tight. He did not answer. He couldn't, not without letting something inside him shatter. Harper's eyes burned as she turned on her father. "Why are you doing this? Why humiliate him in front of everyone?" "'Cause humiliation," Whitmore said coldly, "is the only language the powerless understand. They remember their place when reminded who rules the room." "Rules?" Harper snapped. "You don't rule, you bully. And you think money makes it noble." Whitmore's smile thinned. "I don't need nobility. I need order." The diners murmured, their discomfort rising. Some shifted, some nodded faintly, others looked down at their plates, unable to face the spectacle, but unwilling to turn away. The veteran swallowed, his voice finally cracking through the silence. "You mistake cruelty for strength." Whitmore's head tilted, his gaze sharpening. "And you mistake stubbornness for dignity. Don't worry, soldier. Your lesson is almost over." He gestured with a flick of his fingers. Security stepped closer, their shadows long across the marble. The guards' hands hovered inches from the veteran's arms, ready to seize him, drag him out like an unwelcome animal. "Don't touch him!" Harper's voice rang out, trembling but fierce. "Harper," Whitmore warned, his tone laced with icy control. "Move aside, you've embarrassed me enough tonight." But she did not move. She planted herself between the guards and the veteran, her chin high, her grip tight on the metal still wet with spilled champagne. "I won't let you," she said. The crowd inhaled, tense, waiting. A few phones tilted higher, catching the confrontation at its boiling point. Whitmore leaned close, his voice lowered to a hiss, meant for her but loud enough to echo. "Do not make me choose between my bloodline and my empire." Harper's lip quivered, but her eyes stayed locked. "Maybe it's time you learned which one matters." The word struck harder than a slap. Whitmore's nostrils flared, his composure cracking. His voice erupted, booming over the room. "You think you can shame me in front of them? In my house?" He thrust his hand toward the veteran. "This man is a symbol of everything weak, everything broken, everything I have spent my life rising above. If you stand with him, you fall with him." The diners gasped, recoiling at the sheer force of his outburst, and glasses rattled against saucers. A woman at the bar whispered, "He's unraveling." Whitmore's face glistened with sweat now, his mask of elegance collapsing into rage. He turned on the veteran again, stepping so close, his words sprayed heat across the man's face. "You will not leave with dignity," he spat. "You will crawl. You will be dragged out so every person in this room remembers that Charles Whitmore does not yield. Not to beggars. Not to broken soldiers. Not to anyone." His hand shot forward, snatching at the metal in Harper's grip, jerking it toward himself with a violent twist. The ribbon snapped against her fingers, the star dangling between his clenched knuckles like a trophy ripped from a battlefield. "This is mine now," Whitmore roared. "A reminder to everyone that no symbol, no sacrifice outweighs wealth." The room gasped in horror. Harper cried out, lunging for the metal, but Whitmore shoved her back with one brutal thrust of his arm. She stumbled against a table, knocking over wine glasses, red liquid blooming across the linen like spilled blood. The veteran stepped forward instinctively, fury igniting in his eyes. His voice boomed from deep within, raw and thunderous. "Enough!" The single word cracked through the restaurant, silencing every whisper, every rustle. It carried the weight of drills barked in desert heat, of orders screamed over gunfire, of the last shouts of dying men begging for someone to hold the line. The guards hesitated, caught by the force in his tone. Even Whitmore faltered for half a second before his arrogance surged back. "No," Whitmore snarled, raising the metal high like a sword. "This ends when I say it ends, and I say be." But the room was no longer with him. The murmurs swelled, no longer timid, now restless, angry. Delgado shouted from the bar, her voice slicing through the haze. "You're spitting on every soldier, every family who gave their blood for this country." Others followed. "Disgrace," one man shouted. "You've gone too far," a woman cried. Phones flashed, recording, transmitting his collapse into the world beyond those gilded walls. Whitmore's face reddened, veins bulging at his temples. He held the metal aloft, as though clinging to his last shred of power. "I built this world. I will not be judged by the likes of him." He pointed at the veteran, finger trembling with rage. "You will leave this place on your knees." The words echoed, venomous, final. The veteran did not flinch. He stood taller, straighter than he had all evening, his posture snapping into the rigid dignity of a soldier at attention. His voice was calm, but it thundered with quiet authority. "I've knelt before the graves of my brothers," he said. "I will never kneel for you." The crowd erupted not with laughter, not with applause, but with a rising roar of outrage and defiance. Diners stood from their seats. Some clapped, some shouted, some demanded security turn on Whitmore instead. Whitmore's power cracked, splintering before his eyes. The empire builder who had ruled every room with a smirk and a signature now stood shaking, medal in hand, as the room he thought was his throne began to turn into his trial. And still, he held the medal aloft, desperate, trembling like a man about to swing the hammer of humiliation for the final blow. The stage was set for ruin. The breaking point had arrived. The roar of the diners echoed like a storm trapped beneath the chandeliers, but at the center of it all stood Whitmore, trembling, clutching the veteran's medal as though it were a weapon forged from spite. His empire of control teetered on collapse, yet he clung harder, desperate to drag the veteran down with him. The veteran's back was straight now, his bearing unmistakably military. His words, "I will never kneel for you," still hung in the air, defiant, indelible. Harper, wiping wine from her hands, stared at her father as though seeing him for the first time, the stranger beneath the silk. Whitmore bellowed again, voice hoarse. "This man will leave in disgrace if I have to drag him myself." But the words no longer landed with authority. They landed like shards of glass, brittle and sharp, wounding the speaker more than the target. The crowd had shifted, their loyalty fracturing. Delgado raised her glass high, her voice cutting the air. "You disgrace yourself, Whitmore." "Not him." Others murmured agreement. A few even shouted it outright. Phones glowed like fireflies, capturing his fall from power second by second. And yet, through the chaos, Harper's gaze did not waver from the medal in her father's fist. Something flickered in her eyes, a memory clawing forward from deep inside her. She had seen that star before. Not the one Whitmore now brandished, but another like it. Her hand trembled as she touched her pocket. She still carried it. A medal, small and worn, that had sat for years in her jewelry box. A keepsake she'd never fully understood. A bronze star that had belonged not to her father, but to a man her mother once whispered about in hushed tones. A brother she'd lost before Harper was born. Harper drew it out now. The ribbon faded, the metal dull with age. She held it in her palm, breath catching in her throat. Her voice rose, clear and steady, despite the pounding of her heart. "Father." Whitmore spun toward her, wild-eyed. "You hold his medal as if it's yours to disgrace," she said. She lifted the one in her hand. "But you don't even know what it means, because you've never had to." The room stilled again, the chaos narrowing into silence. All eyes turned to her. "This belonged to Uncle Michael," she continued. "The brother Mom told me about. The one you never speak of. The one who died before I was born. He earned it the same way this man earned his." Whitmore's face drained of color. The mask cracked just slightly, but enough for those closest to see. "I found it in Mom's things after she passed," Harper went on, her voice rising. "I kept it because it was the only piece of him I ever knew. And now I know why you buried it, why you never let his name be spoken. Because he was everything you aren't. He had honor." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Whitmore's jaw tightened, but his grip on the veteran's medal faltered for the briefest moment. The veteran's eyes widened, not at Whitmore, but at Harper. His voice, quiet but intense, cut through the silence. "Michael Whitmore? You're telling me you're his kin?" Harper blinked, startled. "You knew him?" The veteran stepped forward, emotion flickering across his weathered face. "I served with him. Afghanistan. He was my brother in arms." His voice cracked. "We called him Whit. He saved me more than once." The room seemed to collapse into itself, the weight of revelation pulling every gaze tighter. Whitmore shook his head violently, the denial spilling out before he could stop it. Lies. All of it. He was reckless, weak. He threw his life away. "No!" The veteran's voice rang like a gunshot. "He gave his life. There's a difference." Harper clutched her uncle's metal close, tears threatening. "You hated him for choosing sacrifice over ambition. You hated him for being what you could never be." The crowd murmured louder now, no longer unsure, no longer timid. They smelled the blood in Whitmore's pride. They saw the crack in his empire. Whitmore roared, his control unraveling completely. "He died for nothing, just like this man will leave with nothing." He brandished the veteran's medal again, his hand shaking. But Harper stepped closer, lifting her Uncle Star high. "No, Father, he didn't die for nothing. He died so that we could live in freedom, even you. And this man," she pointed to the veteran, "is the living proof of that sacrifice." The veteran's voice dropped to a whisper, thick with memory. "Michael was the bravest man I ever knew. And tonight, standing here, I feel like I see him again. In her." The diners erupted, not in chaos, but in a rising wave of emotion applause, shouts, cries of support. What had begun as quiet complicity was now an awakening. And yet Whitmore stood rigid, snarling, clinging to the metal as though it were the last anchor keeping him above the tide. His eyes darted, calculating, searching for some thread of control to yank back into his grasp. But he had already lost it. Harper and the veteran stood side by side now, two bronze stars gleaming between them, symbols of sacrifice, honor, and truth. The crowd, once neutral, now leaned toward them, away from Whitmore, and still, a question lingered in the charged silence. What will he do now? Whitmore's empire had been built on fear, on silence, on bending others beneath his will. But fear was gone. Silence had been broken. And tonight at last, his daughter had chosen a side. He was cornered. And somewhere deep inside, even Whitmore knew. The reckoning had only just begun. The chandeliers trembled as if the truth itself had shaken the foundations of the Aurelius Club. The two medals glimmered in the candlelight, one dulled with age, the other still slick with spilled champagne. Harper stood with the veteran at her side, both stars lifted like twin beacons in a room drowning in hypocrisy. Whitmore's hand trembled as he clutched the veteran's medal. His face, usually a mask of perfect control, was contorted now, rage, disbelief, and something deeper clawing at him, fear. "You dare!" he growled, his voice hoarse. "You dare to stand there and use my brother's name against me? He abandoned me. He abandoned everything I built." The veteran's eyes burned with memory. "He didn't abandon you. He saved men who would never have walked again if not for him. He went back into fire when everyone else said it was suicide. He didn't abandon you, Charles. He honored you, in the only way a man with courage could." The room stilled, every diner leaning closer. Some were openly crying now, their phones lowered, forgotten. Harper's voice cut through the thick silence. "And you've spent your life trying to erase him because every breath he took reminded you of what you weren't." Whitmore's jaw worked, but words failed him. His empire was crumbling in the space of his own dining room, stripped bare not by competitors or scandals, but by a daughter's truth and a veteran's memory. The veteran stepped forward, his presence towering despite his worn boots and weary shoulders. His voice thundered, steady and resolute. "I was there the day Michael Whitmore earned his star. I watched him run into a burning convoy to drag out men he'd never met. He carried them one by one, coughing up smoke, bullets flying, until the last explosion took him down. And when I crawled to him, when I begged him to stay, he put this medal in my hand and said—" His voice broke just for a second before he forced it steady again. He said, "Give this to my family. Tell them I didn't waste my life. I gave it." Gasps filled the room. Harper pressed her uncle's medal against her heart, trembling. "And you never told me," she whispered, glaring at her father. "You buried his memory because it shamed you." Whitmore's composure shattered. "He left me with nothing, do you understand? While he was out there dying for strangers, I was here building something real. Towers, money, power. He wasted himself for ideals that can't feed you, can't protect you." "Protect?" Harper cut him off, her voice fierce. "He protected you. You lived free to build your towers because he paid the price." The crowd erupted in applause, shouts, anger, and solidarity. Some stood, clapping. Others cried out in outrage at Whitmore's arrogance. The tide had fully turned, and for the first time in his life, Charles Whitmore III looked small beneath the weight of judgment. The veteran reached for his medal, extending his hand with quiet authority. "That medal does not belong to you. It belongs to the men who bled, to the families who mourned, to the truth you've tried to bury. Give it back." Whitmore's hand shook. For a moment it looked as though he might actually return it. But his pride, the same pride that had built skyscrapers and crushed rivals, snapped shut around him like iron. "No," he hissed, pulling the medal closer to his chest. "If I give it back, I admit he was greater than me. And I will never, never bow to that truth." The room seethed with disgust. Delgado shouted from the bar, "Then you've already lost!" Others followed. "Coward! Shame! Give it back!" The chant grew, swelling into a thunderous demand. "Give it back! Give it back!" Whitmore staggered, the walls of his empire closing in. His daughter's eyes blazed, the crowd's fury mounting, and the veteran, calm, steady, immovable, stood like a living monument to everything Whitmore had denied. "Father," Harper said, her voice trembling but resolute, "if you don't return it, you'll lose more than your reputation. You'll lose me. Forever." The words landed like a blade to the chest. For an instant, Charles Whitmore's bravado faltered. His hand loosened around the medal, his lips parting as though to speak. But then the fire of pride flared again, and he roared, raising the star high above his head, desperate, defiant, trembling. "I built this world. I will not be undone by ghosts and beggars." And in that moment, Harper stepped forward, her uncle's medal in hand, her voice cutting through the chaos like lightning. "Then you will be undone by the truth." She held her medal aloft, side by side with the veteran's still clenched in her father's fist. The contrast was undeniable. One stained with champagne and arrogance, the other worn with age and sacrifice. The diners erupted, some climbing onto chairs, shouting, filming, chanting louder, "Give it back! Honor him! Honor them!" The veteran stood tall, eyes fixed on Whitmore. "Your brother died with honor. You're living with none. The choice is yours, Charles. Join him in dignity, or drown in disgrace." Whitmore's breath came in ragged gasps. His grip on the medal wavered. His eyes darted from his daughter to the veteran, to the crowd rising against him. The tide had turned. The moment of reckoning had arrived. The chant rattled the crystal walls of the Aurelius Club. "Give it back! Give it back!" Phones glowed like a constellation of judgment, each one capturing the billionaire who had once ruled every room he entered, now cornered, desperate, his empire of fear collapsing into dust. Charles Whitmore III's hand quivered as he clutched the veteran's bronze star. Sweat streaked down his temple. His eyes darted, searching for allies among the crowd, searching for any sign of obedience. But the faces that once bent to him now stared with open disgust. The maitre d', normally his polished lieutenant, looked away. The banker at table 4 shook his head, muttering, "Unforgivable." Even the security guards shifted uneasily, their loyalty cracking. And then Harper stepped forward. Her face was pale, her jaw firm, her mother's star clenched against her chest. "You're not just humiliating him," she said, her voice trembling but resolute. "You're humiliating Uncle Michael. You're humiliating me. You're humiliating yourself." Whitmore's lips parted, but no words came. For the first time, silence was not his weapon, but his prison. The veteran raised his voice, calm but thunderous, carrying through every corner of the restaurant. "That medal was earned in blood, not bought in gold. If you keep it, you show the world what you've always been, a man without honor. But if you return it, maybe, just maybe, you'll save a piece of your soul." The crowd's chant built into a roar. "Give it back! Give it back!" Whitmore's arm shook violently. The metal glistened in the chandelier light, a symbol heavier than any skyscraper he had ever built. And then, with a guttural growl, half fury, half despair, he hurled it across the room. The metal clattered against the marble, skidding to the veteran's boots. The sound echoed like a gunshot, final and irrevocable. Gasps rippled, but no applause followed, only a crushing silence, as though the world itself was mourning the man Whitmore had become. The veteran bent slowly, his movements deliberate, his hand closing around the star. He lifted it, brushed the dust away, and pressed it against his chest. His voice was low, but every syllable carried. "You cannot tarnish this. You cannot erase them. You cannot own what was bought with their lives." The crowd erupted, applause crashing like waves. Some wept openly. Delgado raised her glass high and shouted, "To the ones who gave all!" And the room echoed her cry, "To the fallen! To the brave!" Phones streamed the moment live. Within minutes, the billionaire's cruelty would circle the globe, his empire dismantled not by rivals or markets, but by his own arrogance caught in the light. Whitmore staggered back, pale, broken. He looked at Harper, desperate, reaching for words, for control, for anything. "Harper, you don't understand. I built this for you." Her eyes glistened with tears, but they were not soft. They were steel. "You didn't build it for me. You built it for yourself. And tonight, you destroyed it with your own hands." She stepped closer, lowering her voice so that only he and yet everyone could hear. "I don't want your towers. I want his honor. I want to remember Uncle Michael without shame." Whitmore's knees nearly buckled. He opened his mouth, but no words came. The titan who had bought senators and toppled competitors now stood speechless before a daughter's judgment and a soldier's truth. The veteran placed a hand gently on Harper's shoulder. His voice was softer now, the storm inside him settling. "Your uncle was proud of you before he ever knew you. He told me. If he didn't make it home, he hoped his family would carry his honor forward. Tonight you did." Harper's tears spilled, but she smiled through them, clutching her uncle's medal. "Thank you." The crowd's applause swelled again, not polite, not hesitant, but thunderous and alive. An ovation not for wealth or status, but for truth, sacrifice, and defiance. Whitmore, trembling, tried to leave, but the guards did not move to escort him. No one rose to clear a path. He had become invisible in the house he once ruled. His power dissolved into shame. Harper turned to the maitre d'. "Please, bring us a table. For him." The maitre d', voice breaking with emotion, bowed deeply. "Of course, Miss Whitmore, the best seat in the house." And so, before the eyes of the rich and powerful, before the ghosts of soldiers passed and the glow of countless recording phones, the veteran was led to a table draped in white linen, the metal gleaming proudly at his chest. Harper sat beside him, her own star resting on the table like a sacred offering. The food arrived, though no one tasted it. The true feast was justice, served hot and undeniable. Whitmore lingered in the corner, a shadow of himself. He tried to speak, but the words stuck, drowned by applause. He tried to leave, but every camera followed, every lens, recording the fall of a man who thought he was untouchable. When he finally stumbled out into the night, he was alone. No entourage, no allies, no daughter. Just silence. Inside, the veteran lifted his glass of water. His voice, hoarse, yet unyielding, rose above the room. "To promises kept," he said. The crowd lifted their glasses, their voices uniting. "To promises kept!" And Harper, tears streaming but smiling, whispered to her uncle's metal, "Rest easy. You're remembered." The chandeliers shone brighter somehow, as though the club itself had been cleansed, stripped of arrogance, bathed in honor. The Aurelius had always been a temple of wealth. But tonight, it became a sanctuary of truth. And the billionaire, once untouchable, had been undone by the very thing he could never buy. Not money, not power, but honor.